This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 171. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. And in this episode, we will be discussing how do I develop my building automation team for profit and growth. So if you are a business owner, if you are a manager of a BAS operations team, or maybe you're looking to get into management of a building automation team, then this is definitely an episode for you. You're going to learn a lot about how to approach the problem of having a lot of work and not a lot of talent to draw from right now. We're going to talk through how you can organize and optimize your business, and we're going to get really tactical on defining kind of how your business is structured and how you can organize your teams around that. Now, this episode is sponsored by our corporate program, which is our program to help companies be able to assess their technical talent, identify any gaps that exist within their employees' skill set, and then close those gaps in the shortest amount of time possible. That way, those employees can be contributing profitably to their business. So if you manage an operations team or you own a business related to building automation, then I encourage you to go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/171, scroll down to the Building Automation Monthly logo, click on that, and it will take you directly to our corporate programs page where you can learn more about our assessment process, our training process, and how we validate those training results. And you can schedule a free assessment for your technicians, for your designers, your salespeople, so that you can know where they're at. All right. So like I said, the problem we are facing within this industry is that there's a lot of work. I mean, cranes are up everywhere. Everyone has work, and there's not enough people to do the work. So we have kind of three options. One is we can look at the people who are in the marketplace and we can try to get them. That's usually pretty costly. We can try to develop new talent. We've had a pretty good track record of taking people fresh off the street and turning them into building automation professionals, but it still takes a little bit of time. Or we can take our existing teams, we can figure out exactly what we're trying to do with them, and then we can develop them in the areas that we need in order to optimize how we're doing business right now. Now, what does that really mean, optimize? Well, ideally, what you're going to do is you're going to have the right people focusing on the right tasks to minimize waste, also known as slippage, so that you are executing tasks based on their estimated cost and profitability targets. So if you think of installing a VAV box, you have a set amount of time allocated to a technician to install that box. You have a set amount of cost related to materials and subcontractors. Now, if that was estimated, and we're just going to use round numbers here, I realize that it does not cost $100 to install a VAV box. I realize it costs more than that, but we're just going to use the number 100 just because it's a round number. Let's say that you execute that for 100 or you estimate it for 100 and then you execute it at 150, meaning that it costs 150 to execute. That means that you are not being profitable. You are actually losing money. Now, on the flip side, let's say you execute it at $50. That means you're being very profitable. Now, that's taking into account that, yes, you can skip things and not do things right and be profitable, but ultimately, folks will find out and you'll go out of business. You won't get repeat business, at least not when the economy slows down. Maybe right now, but not when the economy slows down. So our goal is to deliver great service, a great installed or retrofitted product, while at the same time making sure that we are being profitable. So how do we do this? Well, first, whenever I'm consulting with folks or I'm talking with our corporate customers and they're just kind of brainstorming with me, hey, how should we approach this? We're building out a new controls team. Maybe we're a mechanical contractor. We're building out a new controls team. Or maybe we want to expand into a new area. How can we approach this? First thing I always say is to decide on what delivery model you want to support. Do you want to do new construction? Do you want to do retrofit? Do you want to do service? Do you want to do integration? Do you want to do energy analysis and analytics? If you're doing new construction, do you want to do plan and spec work? Do you want to do design build work? Are you trying to be an owner's rep? What do you want to do? Thing is the difference between a new construction team and a service team is quite different in the delivery model. Your ability to support new construction with a service team or support both at the same time, unless you're a large organization, is significantly dampered. It's significantly constrained because you got to think about it, right? We have on-call service techs who are going to be sent out at a moment's notice, and you can't just be pulling them off of job sites. You have deadlines on jobs. And so to go and just pull them off a job site to do a service call, it's not a recipe for success. So we really, initially at least, want to get one delivery model down, one delivery model solid. And once we have that, then we can build into a service group. Then we can build into that retrofit group, or vice versa. Then we can build into construction. We have to have a home base. We have to have a solid foundation. From there, I really recommend you decide on a vertical. The reason I recommend this is that vertical markets are specific in their installation processes. So for example, right, you do K through 12. That's largely summer work. That's work that is going to be a fair mix of retrofit as well as new construction. It tends to be low margin work, very much focused on your ability to execute profitably. And it tends to be, in most cases, packaged units, things like that. Not a lot of VAV boxes and chilled water plants unless you're dealing with, high schools or just large campuses. Now, you take that, you flip it to commercial real estate. Now you're looking at packaged rooftop units with VAV systems typically, and maybe an air-cooled chiller, depending on where you're at, maybe a boiler as well. So you start to have, when you do the same vertical again and again and again, you start to develop tacit knowledge related to that vertical. Your salespeople develop knowledge related to that vertical. They start to make connections. You start to develop expertise. You start to create these programs, right? And when I say programs, I literally mean software programs like that go into a physical controller. You start to create a program library based on that vertical, and that enables you to be much more efficient. Now, if you were trying to write programs for a level 4 CDC lab and a commercial real estate and a data center and a K through 12, you would have difficulty replicating those programs and using them as a standard library across multiple different verticals. So I recommend you specialize on a delivery model, and then you also specialize on a vertical. Now, once you've done this, it's important to structure your business around your delivery model and market. So if you're going to focus on K through 12, then you have to have a very flexible delivery model. This is where I see a lot of folks start to, where their businesses kind of die based on K through 12, is because they do all the summer work, but then they don't know how to stay profitable on the non-summer months. And this is where you have to have kind of a hybrid construction/service organization so that you're able to execute the work and then you support the schools via service. And that's different than K through or commercial real estate, which may carry you through an entire calendar year. So you need to structure your business around this delivery model and the market you're serving. Next up, you need to decide how you're going to execute your work, right? So you have to look at how are you going to execute work all the way through the entire project process or service call or whatever. So if you are going to, let's just use new construction because it's an easy example. You know that you have to project manage. You know that you have to order material. You have to physically install that material. You have to go and test that material. You have to program that material. And so you have to ask yourself, where am I going to be doing this? Am I going to be self-executing the entire thing? Am I going to be contracting subcontractors? So am I going to be going and getting electrical subs to do things? Am I going to be outsourcing? Am I going to outsource my design work? Am I going to outsource my graphics work? All of these could be the right answer. It just really depends on your delivery model, your market, your structure, your profitability targets. I mean, if you have high margin projects and you have a lot of them, then you can go and really outsource a lot of stuff and eat that cost because you're still going to be profitable. You may be a little less profitable than if you self-executed, but you will have the flexibility, the elasticity to scale for however much work you need. Once you've done this, once you've decided how you're going to execute, then you just have to decide how you're going to staff your team. So there's a lot of roles, but they basically break down. So when I look at our corporate programs, right, we have paths. We assess employees. We look at what their skills are. We identify the gaps based on we've done a lot of people who have been through our assessment. And so we're able to quickly identify kind of where are they compared to the baseline. And then based on that, we're able to say, okay, what's their role? And we're able to have a course path. So we have a technician, a designer, a programmer, a sales, a new, and a system integrator path. And pretty soon we're going to have a project manager path. Now, the reason I tell you all that is because those are kind of the roles that you would expect to see, right? You would have a technician, you would have a designer, which would be doing submittals, graphics, things like that. You would have a programmer doing programming, obviously. You would have a salesperson who sells. You would have a system integrator who integrates more complex projects. We're talking, really, really smart MSI kind of stuff. And then you have project management. So you got to figure out how you're going to staff, what your delivery model and execution model are. And then based on that, you'll be able to know how many people you need to put into what roles. Okay? So you with me so far? So far we've went through delivery model. We've went through verticals. We've talked about structuring our business. We've talked about deciding how we're going to execute, deciding how we're going to staff. So when we're looking at team structure, we have to identify, are we going to have a PM that's going to have, a bunch of projects under him or her and then is going to manage the technical staff? Are we going to have a working PM? Some OEMs are known to utilize working PMs. These are PMs that have the financial responsibility for the project. So they have projects under their financial portfolio, but they're also doing technical work. And then we also have to decide on our team, are we going to use technical generalists or are we going to use specialists? So are we going to have a generalist that does everything? So they do the startup, they do the point-to-point, they do the programming, the graphics, or are we going to have a specialist that this person does like a conveyor belt? We have one person that's the tech, we have one person that's the designer, and so they're able to be working on multiple jobs. I would argue that if you want to get beyond 10 million in revenue per year, in most cases, you need to lean more towards having specialists than generalists, more so running your business as a conveyor belt rather than having someone who is the end all be all for every project. So you have a super tech basically. Now that's for construction. If you are primarily service and retrofit, the technical generalist actually works quite well because you never know what you're going to run into. So it really just depends, once again, on your delivery model. So once you've done this, you need to map out the life cycle of your work. And this is probably the part where most folks stop. They kind of get their team structure. They usually will figure out what they're going to focus on as far as delivery model. Sometimes they'll focus on their verticals, but 9 times out of 10, they do not focus on mapping out their life cycle of the work. And that's to their detriment, because what you're doing when you do this is you're essentially listing out a project, maybe on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, and you're saying, all right, these are all the major milestones that we're going to have to do. So we are going to have to install conduit and run wire, etc. We're going to have to mount controllers. We're going to have to order material. We're going to have to attend job. You get the point. You start to list out all these milestones, and you're going to have a lot. Good news is that once you've listed them out, they are pretty consistent across most projects. So you've mapped out this life cycle, and now you need to align work milestones with your staffing. So this is going to be the first kind of look at where do we have some gaps, because we're going to start to see, are we plugging the same person into like 20 milestones, and then we have 2 people that only have, 2 milestones, and those milestones are basically the same amount of work, or are they significantly less? Because it's fine to have only 2 milestones on one person if it's the same amount of work as someone who has 20 milestones. So what that means is, like, you could have someone who has to order material, has to check the billings, et cetera, a lot of little tasks. And then you could have someone who has to do all the programming. So that they may only have 1 milestone, but that is a big milestone. So hopefully that makes sense. But as you start to align these milestones, if you start to see a huge disparity where you have either underutilized or heavily overutilized staff, now you're starting to realize, when we come later to training your team, where you can start to train, because you want to avoid employee burnout. You don't want people jumping ship. It costs like $30,000 at the minimum to replace an employee, not counting downtime and search costs and all that jazz. So we're looking at, it's very important to understand where you are underutilized and overutilized. That way you can train and shift responsibilities. That is part of optimizing your team in order to deliver your profitability goals. So next, you need to start measuring your milestones. How long does it take to go and create submittals on an average size job? What is the rejection rate? How much do we hit our billing targets? Do we hit our billing targets? Are we primarily cash flow positive, or are we very cash flow negative and we're dependent on billings and we've got payouts that, are just sapping our cash fund? As well as with our technicians, are we able to get off the job? Are they properly doing point to point? These are all things we can measure. We can start to look at estimated hours versus executed hours. If you aren't doing a sales to operations handoff where your operations team is reviewing the estimated hours and then either doing a reestimate or accepting, and then you're tracking those executed hours with job codes, if you aren't doing that and you're above $5 million in revenue, you are really hurting. I would argue that if you're above $1 million in revenue, you should be doing that, because it's just a good best practice to put in place. Now, what I'm talking about is there's certain tasks like installing controllers, doing submittals, doing graphics, and all of these different tasks should have different labor rates and different cost codes associated with them. You should train your team to go and charge their time to the appropriate cost codes. That way you know what is being executed effectively and what is not. If you start to see that consistently you're over on programming time, then you're either underestimating the programming and you need to educate the sales folks, or your programmer's not efficient, in which case you need to assess your programmer, make sure they have the technical knowledge, and if not, close that gap. Which brings us to assessing your team. Now, creating a assessment for your team, it's not difficult per se, but it is at the same time. You basically create a bunch of quantitative questions, right? So you create all these quantitative questions that you can effectively measure. You verify that these questions are good questions by testing them with a large pool of people. And then once you've done that, you start to utilize these questions, create a baseline of, hey, this is the average score. And then you're able to see when people fall above or below that average score range. Once you start to do that, you also align each one of the questions with a functional area. If you really want to do this at like a pro level, what you do is you have a job description and you align specific skills in the job description with the questions in the assessment. So that if people get those questions wrong, and you'll usually do like 3 to 5 questions per job skill, because you'll typically have 15 to 20 job skills on a resume on a job description. And so then you'll have 3 to 5 questions. So your average assessment tends to be 60 to 80 questions. Once you've done this, though, you start to identify the areas in which your team members are either really shining or are really lacking. Once you identify these areas and you have this baseline, then you can start to train your team. Now, this could look like internal training. Some large OEMs have their own internal training programs. This could look like an outsourced training provider like ourselves, where we provide this turnkey where we assess the team, train them, measure the changes, and validate them through testing as they move through a training program. So it really just depends. Whatever you decide to do, and I'll do a future episode on training your team. I've done a couple so far in the past, and I'll do a newer one with just all the stuff I've learned having been running this business for a while. But you train your team, and then the most important thing once you've trained your team is that you go and measure the changes. So you measure the changes, and that allows you to know, like we've seen with some of the companies we've served, where they assess someone and they find that this person that they've been using as a technician is like in the 90th percentile on programming. And our programming assessment is pretty difficult. Our assessment in general is pretty difficult. A lot of people tell us that it's the hardest assessment they've ever taken. But our programming assessment is quite difficult. You have to understand programming. And so they find folks that are like, oh man, this guy tested at 80, 90% on programming, and we're using him to install controllers. We should probably reconsider using this person for a different task, something that at their labor rate, we can bill a much higher cost to our customers and make a lot of profit. So you really got to think through these kind of things. You really should constantly, at least I would do it every 3 months personally, but at least every 6 months, you should assess your team and you should be revising a training program, because right now, that is one way to retain employees, which that has to be part of your management strategy, is employee retention. Right now, the market is so slim with talent. It costs so much to get new talent. And then you got to train them up and match them with your culture. So you really want to make sure that you are assessing your team, training them, measuring changes, and just giving them opportunities to grow consistently. All right, so let's recap. So the problem is that there's lots of work with a very small talent pool. And how do we deal with that so that we can organize and optimize our business to gain maximum profit and growth? Well, we do that by deciding on what delivery model we're going to support, whether we're going to do new construction, retrofit, et cetera, et cetera. Then we decide on what vertical we're going to serve with that delivery model. Then we structure our business around that delivery model and vertical market. We decide on how we're going to execute, whether we're going to self-execute, contract out some of it or all of it, outsource some of it or all of it. And then based on those decisions, we decide on how we're going to staff our teams. We start to identify our roles. We figure out what we're going to be doing as far as project management, as far as our technical talent, and then we map out the life cycle of our work. Knowing our roles, we plug our roles into the major work milestones so that we can then measure those milestones for those employees who are executing those milestones. And from there, we go and assess our team to their job descriptions and also looking at the milestones they're supposed to execute. Then we identify any gaps. We train those teams either using outsourced training providers like my company or by your own internal training team. If maybe you're a large OEM and you have your own internal training team. And then you go and measure the changes that have happened and you recycle through this assess, train, measure process, ideally every 3 months, but realistically, most of the cases every 6 months. So there you have it. That is an approach that has worked really well for me to organize and optimize a building automation business. That is an approach that if you follow, you'll be looking at this time. I mean, this is something that you could apply right now and see effects by December. There's very few things in this industry where you can apply it right now and see its effect within 6 months. I've got testimonial after testimonial of customers who have put their folks into our programs or have used our consulting services and have seen in 3 to 6 months an increase in executed margin per FTE, so per full-time equivalent employee, and they have seen a decrease in slippage, and they've seen an increase in utilization, most importantly, profitable utilization. So I really encourage you to apply this model because it is a very good model and it works. And there's no one else out there teaching it, which is a shame. But hey, you guys heard it here. So if you have any questions at all, please go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/171. Ask your questions in the discussion at the end of the page. Don't forget, if you are a manager or you own a building automation team or company, be sure to check out our corporate programs by scrolling down to the Building Automation Monthly logo and clicking on that logo. Thanks a ton for being here. I look forward to talking to you in next week's episode, which I'm not sure what it's going to be yet. I just got back from Boy Scout camp with my son, so I'm playing major catch up, and I'm not even sure what next week's podcast is going to be about, but it's going to be something good. So until next week, take care, and I look forward to hearing from you all in the comments, and thanks a ton. Take care.